India would very much expect that Russia will return the favor this year and not invite Pakistan. And China is a much larger nation, much more powerful nation than India. So, what does Russia do? That is for Russia to decide. The ball is in Russia's court. This year's BRICS summit will be held in Kazan, in Russia, most likely in October. Pakistan has applied to become a member of BRICS. China is supporting Pakistan's membership bid in BRICS. India does not want Pakistan to become a member of BRICS for obvious reasons, and the ball is now in Russia's court. Let's find out what's happening. This video is brought to you by my geopolitics course, Geopolitics from First Principles. It's the course that you would need to understand how geopolitics really works and how the global order of nations is actually constructed from the perspective of hard power. The link is in the description below. Let's go ahead with the video. So, what is BRICS? BRICS is an intergovernmental organization which is made up of the nations BRICS, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, as well as Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the UAE. We're not quite sure if Saudi Arabia has officially entered and become a member of BRICS or not. There seems to be some confusion about that, but these are the 9 members that we are sure are part of BRICS. So if you look at the totality of the BRICS members, they make up about 30% of the world's land surface. They make up about 45% of the global population. They contribute about 30% of the entire world's GDP, which is now in excess of the G7 nations' contribution to the world's GDP, which is about 26%. So BRICS has eclipsed G7 in terms of its contribution to the world's GDP. If you look at this graph, you will see that 3 of the 4 most powerful nations in the world are a part of BRICS. That is Russia, China, and India. 3 of the top 4 most powerful nations. And Brazil obviously is also in the top 10. And you will see that Iran, Egypt, and the UAE are also in the top 20. Even Saudi Arabia is in the top 10. So this chart that you're seeing is something that I have created. It's something I'm going to be releasing very soon. It's the Chavda Index of global hard power rankings. And if you want to understand how it is calculated, take a look at my course, enroll for my course, and you will see how this entire system is calculated. So, BRICS is currently growing, it's expanding. It has expanded this year. At least 4 new nations have joined, and many more nations want to join. So, BRICS is really attractive to the global south nations, the developing nations, and as many as 34 nations are currently trying to join BRICS. Now, despite all of this, India and China are adversaries. So all is not well within BRICS. India and China are adversaries with thinly veiled hostility towards each other. Both nations share a very long, very large, undemarcated border, the India-Tibet border, and China has steadfastly refused to demarcate this border. So it's an open border. It's a massive border dispute, and there have been clashes in recent times along the border, and there have been clashes even before that. India and China went to war in 1962, which China won. 1967, which was a limited war that India won. There were major clashes in 87 that India won, and there was the recent Galwan clash. There was the Doklam incident, the Daulat Beg Oldi incident from a decade ago. So there's this history of continuing clashes, and the Galwan incident was pretty deadly because soldiers died on both sides as a consequence of this clash. And currently, there are about 200,000 soldiers on each side of the undemarcated border that are facing each other off. So it's a tense situation. The relationship between the two nations is quite hostile. It's barely held in check, and both nations are nuclear armed nations. So India and China are adversaries, open adversaries, and it's all because of China. India did not create the situation. So we'll not go into the history of that. So that's one situation. And Russia and China are also natural adversaries, despite the current cooperative relationship that they share. And there's a whole history behind that as well. There was a time in the 1960s when the USSR had actually decided to nuke China, and the Americans stepped in and saved China. And there were the Usuri River border clashes between the two nations that caused a large number of deaths, and there was this long-standing border dispute that was resolved only in the first decade of the 21st century, and the Chinese have now reopened that border dispute with Russia. So there is a, an undercurrent of adversarial relationship even between Russia and China. And the two nations share a long border. They are two very powerful nations, so they are natural adversaries. Um, and what complicates things is that when we look at BRICS, China is each nation's major trade partner for all the other BRICS nations. So there is this complicated relationship that we find within BRICS. So all is not well within BRICS. But it's not a military alliance. It's an intergovernmental organization, and its primary focus is trade and interconnectivity to some extent. So that's how things stand within BRICS. So this year's summit is going to be held in Kazan, in Russia, most likely in October. And Mr. Putin, the newly re-elected Russian president, has said that this summit will be dedicated to establishing a fair world order. And this is clearly a jibe at the so called rules based world order that is the creation of the US and the West, which is a pretty hypocritical thing because they make up the rules as they go and they bend the rules and flout the rules as they see fit whenever they see fit. So Putin wants to create to establish a fair world order, and BRICS is the vehicle that will do that. Now, when it comes to Pakistan, Pakistan applied to become a member of BRICS in 2023, and they are somehow expecting a fast-tracked uh, consideration of their application. And earlier this year, high-ranking Pakistan government officials visited Russia to lobby with Russia to consider their application and fast track it and approve their application to join BRICS. Now, why does India not want Pakistan to be part of BRICS? Well, the reason is obvious. Pakistan is India's number one, has historically been India's number one enemy. That's how India has perceived it, even though China was the real enemy. But India and Pakistan have gone to war four times, 48, 1948, 1965, 1971, 1997, which was a limited war. And Pakistan has been the, it's the global epicenter of terrorism. Its major export is state-sponsored terrorism. Pakistan has bled India with terrorism for decades while being funded and financed by the US. So there is this long-standing uh, hostile relationship that India and Pakistan have, and Pakistan has been the villain in this entire thing. Nobody can deny that they are the number one state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Um, so let me give you the example of SARC. SARC is the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. It's a grouping of nations, an intergovernmental grouping of nations that's based in the Indian subcontinent. Now, SARC used to have these summits on a regular basis every year or every 2 years, sometimes every 3 years. The 19th SARC summit happened in 2016 in Pakistan, and India boycotted the 2016 summit in Pakistan in the aftermath of the terrorist attack conducted by Pakistan in Uri in Jammu and Kashmir. And once India boycotted, most of the other nations also boycotted this summit. And that was the last of it. After that, no SARC summit has happened after 2016, and SARC is essentially a defunct organization. So India has ensured that it does not engage with Pakistan in any manner. We India and Pakistan do have diplomatic relations, but that's about it. There is no engagement, there's no trade, there's nothing between the two nations. The leaders don't meet, they don't talk. India has made sure that it does not engage with Pakistan in any manner whatsoever. And India in the past decade has grown so much that there is no question of any India Pakistan hyphenation. There is no comparison between the two nations anymore. So that is the deal. And so India does not want Pakistan to be a member of any organization that it's part of. And when it comes to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that India joined in 2017, China ensured that Pakistan also joins at the same time in 2017. So that is something India could not do much about because China is the dominant nation in the SCO. So that's something India has had to accept, but India will not accept Pakistan becoming a member of BRICS. Now, when it comes to these BRICS summits, The host nation typically has the right to invite other nations to participate in the summit. For example, in the 2023 summit, which was held in South Africa, the host nation, South Africa, invited 67 nations to participate in the 2023 BRICS summit. So these nations were members of the African Union, the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and so on. 67 nations were invited as part of what is called the BRICS Plus outreach. So this year also, in the Kazan summit, there's going to be a BRICS plus outreach, and Russia, as the host nation, will have the right to invite other nations to participate. Now, what nations would Russia like to invite? Uh, it's believed that they would like to invite the members of the Commonwealth of Independent States, the CIS nations, which is the various nations that broke off from the USSR in the early 1990s when the USSR disintegrated, which is the various stans, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, so on and so forth, and also nations like Armenia and Belarus and so on. So that's the CIS nations. Then you have the Eurasian Economic Union, which is a subset of the CIS. So those nations will automatically be invited if the CIS nations are invited. Then Russia would also like to invite the members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, here's the subtle politics behind this. The CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States, is a grouping of nations that is led and dominated by Russia. Russia is the top dog, so to say, the top bear, let's say. Okay. The EU, the Eurasian Economic Union, is also dominated by Russia. All these nations are part of Russia's essentially exclusive sphere of influence. But the SCO nations, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization nations, that grouping of nations is led and dominated by China. And Russia would like to subtly challenge this Chinese domination of the SCO by inviting the SCO member states to the BRICS summit. So Russia is essentially kind of taking the lead in this case. Now that's where things get complicated because Pakistan is a member of the SCO. It joined in 2017 along with India. And India would very much not like Pakistan to be part of the summit. They would not want Russia to invite Pakistan. Now let's take a look at very recent past history. In 2022, there was a BRICS summit that was held by China. It was hosted by China, but it was hosted virtually because of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. And in the 2022 BRICS summit that China hosted, Pakistan was not invited. Now, Pakistan is a nation that China would very much want to use as a counterbalance against India. The Chinese have aided Pakistan a lot in the past. They call themselves, the two nations call themselves the Iron Brothers. Pakistan is now very much, once again, a US vassal, but there is some kind of there's still some cooperation between Pakistan and China would like to use Pakistan as a counterbalance to India to keep India off balance. And historically, if we take a look at the relations, the Chinese have ensured that the Pakistan missile program takes off by supplying Pakistan with North Korean missile technology, and they probably also supplied Pakistan with nuclear weapons designs. And they probably also tested those nuclear weapons designs, those nuclear weapons in Lopnor. So, so Pakistan is a nation that China would like to invite, but even though they would like to invite Pakistan to the BRICS summit, they chose not to invite Pakistan in 2022 because they were worried that India would boycott the event, right? So that's why China did not invite Pakistan in 2022. Now, in the 2023 G20 summit, there was a tremendous amount of pressure on India from the West, from the US, to invite Ukraine to participate in that summit. And India chose not to invite Ukraine despite all the pressure. India resisted this tremendous pressure from the West, from the US, and India did not invite Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky, to participate in the summit so as to take care of the Russian sensitivities and the Russian request to not let this happen. So India ensured that Russia's interests were taken care of in the 2023 G20 summit. The two nations, India and Russia, they have what is called a privileged strategic relationship, a very warm strategic relationship. The two nations claim that, and probably rightly so, to a large extent, that they have never done anything that harms each other's national interest. And they have always tried to accommodate the needs and requirements and sensitivities and requests of the other. So, with that precedent in mind, India would very much expect that Russia will return the favor this year and not invite Pakistan to the 2024 BRICS summit in Kazan, most likely in October. So the ball is in Russia's court. What's Russia going to do? Now, what are Russia's compulsions? First of all, they would like to invite the SCO member states to the BRICS summit. Secondly, they will obviously face some pressure from China. China will encourage, let's say, Russia to invite Pakistan. And China is obviously a very important partner for Russia for now, right? Russia is facing a whole bucket load of Western sanctions, and it's been able to withstand those sanctions, first of all, because it's an autarky, it produces everything it needs. Secondly, because of its connections and good relations with nations like China, India, Iran, and so on. And the major nation here is China. And there was a fear that Russia would become a Chinese puppet, a Chinese vassal, after the 2022 special military operation in Ukraine. But it was able to, withstand that the threat because of the pressure that was released by India buying copious amounts of Russian oil and so on. So China is a very important nation for Russia, but India is also a very important nation for Russia. So Russia is kind of caught between these two. China is a much larger nation, much more powerful nation than India. So what does Russia do? That is for Russia to decide. The ball is in Russia's court. But what about Pakistan's application to become a member of BRICS? That's one, inviting Pakistan to the summit is one thing, and approving Pakistan's membership to BRICS is a whole different thing. So that would depend on what are the criteria for a nation to become a member of BRICS. So the criteria are kind of ambiguous and not very clear. But if you look at the document that's available, one of the criteria for becoming a member of BRICS is that a new BRICS member state should have diplomatic and friendly relations with all existing BRICS member states. Well, that is a huge red flag for Pakistan because Pakistan clearly does not have friendly relations with India. But does India get a veto? I mean, it's not quite clear whether there has to be complete consensus among all member nations of BRICS before a new member can be admitted. The situation is not quite clear. But it's very clear that if India can enlist the support of other BRICS member states, then it will be very hard for Pakistan to become a member. So India will have to engage the other BRICS members diplomatically. And India is really good at diplomacy. For example, Indian diplomacy was very clear, and it was a big win for India during the G20 summit when India was able to, against all odds, reach a complete arrive ensure that all nations of the G20 summit arrive at a consensus about the language and the wording in the final declaration of the nations. So that was a big win for Indian diplomacy. Another big win for Indian diplomacy was the recent success in repatriating a number of former Indian naval personnel from Oman who were detained and imprisoned and sentenced to death. And India was able to do this in a very good manner, in a win-win manner for both nations. So Indian diplomacy is really good. India has got very good diplomats, and I'm sure that India, once it engages with all the BRICS member states, will be able to ensure that Pakistan doesn't succeed in its bid to become a member of BRICS. But when it comes to the 2024 BRICS summit, the ball is in Russia's court. Let's see what they decide to do. So that is the situation overall. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you very soon in the next video.